What the heck on earth is this? It kind of looks like, I don't know, like a like a green pancake being flopped onto like a little volcano with spewing water instead of lava, and all these like arrows. It looks like darts, horns coming out, and these words haploid and diploid. Ah, this is so confusing. Oh, fern life cycle. I get it. Oh, I get it. I know exactly what this is. Um, the gametophyte in seedless vascular plants is separate from the sporophyte. In general, when you see any other plant besides a bryophyte, a moss lichen, or excuse me, a moss, a liverwort, or a hornwort, you're seeing a sporophyte, unless you look really close. In the case of seedless vascular plants, so this item that looks like it's heart shaped, because it is heart shaped, I guess, is about the size of a baby's fingernail. It's flat. It's green, photosynthetic. It's a plant. And if you look really, really carefully, you would see on this plant these little projecting things here are archegonia, and somewhere towards the tip of the heart-shaped thing here are antheridia. So this little object, this little flattened heart-shaped thing with that has antheridia and archegonia, is a gametophyte. It produces gametes, and it's a plant. Unlike our diagrams that showed male gametophyte, female gametophyte, this gametophyte is co-sexual, hermaphroditic, whatever you call it. It's both male and female, producing both eggs and sperm. Some plants do that. And here at the in the archegonium, which is kind of like an egg in a bottle, um, there is an egg, and the antheridia produce sperm. And here again, we have this little sluiceway thing going on, because in all the non-seed plants, mosses, liverworts, hornworts, and ferns and lycophytes, the sperm needs water in the environment in order to reach the egg. So environmental water is necessary. They're still kind of like, they still got their toe in the pond. And um, when fertilization takes place, um, there is a fertilized egg in the archegonium, and it develops an embryo that develops into a sporophyte. Now, this stage in the development of a fern, I like it. It's kind of poignant and suggestive to me of my favorite plants, which are bryophytes. Look, at this stage, my question would be, how many plants are there? And the answer would be, of course, two. Um, this one here is the kind of old gametophyte, and this here is the young sporophyte. And at this moment, look, the sporophyte is attached to its mother, attached to the gametophyte. It's kind of configured the same way a moss is, except it doesn't have the same shape and look to it. But it's a gametophyte with a sporophyte attached. Same as bryophytes. But this gametophyte, remember, is really small. It's about the size of a fingernail, and it never gets bigger, and it withers away because it's done its job, and the sporophyte develops into this big leafy thing that is what you think of when you think of a fern. Ferns are mostly leaves, what you see. The roots are usually under the ground. And, the stems are mostly under the ground. And if you were to look at typically, the undersurface of the leaves of a fern, you would see these clusters of sporangia, which happen to be called Sorai, Sori. And when they're ripe, they have meiosis take place in them, and the spores, which are haploid, develop into gametophytes. So what we have is the sporophyte and the gametophyte are separate. The gametophyte is really small compared to the sporophyte. The thing that you would normally look at and say there's a fern is definitely a sporophyte. And the gametophytes are, there's a sort of an old name for gametophytes. They used to be called a prothallus. It's sort of a slightly non-technical term. I'll put in quotation marks. Pro meaning before, And thallus is a word that means sort of an undifferentiated plant without a lot of structural detail, which is kind of what this is like. It's sort of flappy. And that is the fern life cycle. And it's really the same kind of life cycle that all non-seed plants have, except that the sporophytes and the gametophytes might look somewhat different than a fern or a little heart-shaped thing. But they're small, hand lens or barely micro or maybe microscope, and the sporophyte is the conspicuous part. And that's what ferns are like in their life cycle. Here's a picture of a fern. It's a fern called Christmas fern, and if you look carefully at this is, of course, is a sporophyte leaf. The leaflets are generally kind of large, and they kind of abruptly become small at the top. And this fern is divided, is partitioned into non-reproductive, sterile, vegetative lower part with the big leaves, and then the upper part has these small leaves that are, if you look at the undersurface of them, you see these clusters of sporangia. They're called Sorai. These little things that look like little eyeballs. They're actually a flap-like covering of the groups of sporangia. It's called an indusium. And in this particular fern, they're kind of like little umbrellas. They're attached at the center, and it's fun drawing them. And that is one of the ways to recognize this. This is called Christmas fern, Polysticum acrosticoides, and that is the undersurface with the clusters of sporangia. The sporangia themselves are really, really small. You can barely make them out in this photo as being sort of granular. And if you to look at the ground underneath these ferns at the right time of the year, like I did once, here we see gametophytes with sporophytes coming out of it. So this part right here, I'm going to change the color of this so it's more standouty. I'm going to go with black. This part right here, it's sort of soft and matte looking, that's the prothallus, the gametophyte, where the gametes are. And this part here, that looks sort of more leafy and light, that's the very young sporophyte. So down here is the gametophyte, and here's the very young sporophyte growing out of it. Here's a little gametophyte. So these are fern gametophytes. These are really small. I don't know, I think this is maybe a few centimeters across. And that's what fern gametophytes look like. You have to look carefully to see them. Fern sporophytes, typically, and especially in textbooks, they show the aggregations of sporangia, the Sorai, on the undersurfaces of the leaves, because in many ferns, they are on the undersurfaces of the leaves. This is an example of one, and you can sort of see the shape of these Sorai. These linear ones are characteristic of this particular genus of plants. It's called Etherium. Here's one where they're sort of kidney-shaped, which is how you can recognize this otherwise very similar fern, which is called Bryophytes. It's a wood fern. Here's the fern that we saw a picture of earlier before. It's called Pody. And if you look at the undersurface, you see these fairly large Sorai. And again, this picture that shows a close-up, these don't have that flap of tissue called the indusium. They're kind of naked Sorai. And you can see the individual sporangia. Here's a fern that instead of having the sporangia on the undersurface of leaflets or on the undersurface of leaves, have leaves that are fully and completely devoted to the production of spores, or not at all. So this circular group of fern leaves, in this case the stem is vertical, and the leaves come up around it, off it in a circular rosette, very attractive. It's called cinnamon fern because the fertile fronds, the ones that produce spores, have this nice tawny cinnamon-like color. So this is the ones that look withered and sort of like something might be wrong. Those are the ones that are producing spores, and the ones that look fresh and happy, those are the ones that are completely vegetative. The term that's often used is sterile. It doesn't mean like antiseptic sterile. It means not fertile, meaning not producing spores. So here's a narrowly focused picture of the cinnamon fern. In the foreground, in sharp focus, is the fertile frond, and then changing the focus a little bit, we see in the center the sterile frond. And here's a close-up showing these are really big sporangia. These are a particular kind of sporangia that characterizes this group of ferns, really big ones. Here's another fern that has a different kind of arrangement of the sporophyte rather than being on the undersurface, but rather than being on a separate leaf entirely, the leaf is subdivided into a sterile part and a fertile part, and the fertile part has these huge sporangia. They kind of look like little grapes. This is called a kind of grape fern. It's actually also called rattlesnake fern because the clusters of sporangia look kind of like a rattlesnake's rattle. And here the sporangia are when they're almost ripe, and here they are after some of them have released their spores. Really, really big sporangia on this this grape fern. So here's one of the questions in the handout, the guidance for this. And so now I hope we have a pretty good idea of what the sporophytes and the gametophytes are kind of like with some actual real plants. And so if someone were to ask you, like, what do you mean when you say a moss gametophyte? And a moss gametophyte, it's a small plant, with stems and leaves on it. Basically, what you think of when you think of a plant, it's small, and it's leafy. Whoop! Hey, come back here, you. Eek! Now what am I going to do? Why did that happen? And maybe that's better. It's small, and it's not big, and it doesn't have largeness. And if you can draw a moss, you've done it. The moss sporophyte. Now you really can't. The moss sporophyte's basically like this. A stalk with a sporangium or a capsule on it. That's this part here. And you never see the sporophyte without the gametophyte. So you might as well draw the gametophyte here. And you're giving the world an impression of what basically the sporophyte and the gametophyte are with mosses. Ferns. The fern gametophyte, it's kind of like a little heart-shaped thing with little rhizoids. It's tiny. It's like about maybe half a centimeter across. It's green. It's photosynthetic. Whatever illustration you can do that matches what you saw a few minutes ago. Fern sporophyte, that's a fern. A big leafy jabberoo that you might, bang your head on if you go into a fern bar. It does not look like a fern. Come on, give me a break. It's late. And with sporangia, ta-da. And while we're on the subject of things that make these plants be different from one another, mosses. Mosses are only, when I say mosses, I mean mosses and other bryophytes, is that they're non-vascular, and the gametophyte is the dominant stage in the life cycle. And now we see what that means. Too bad this writing isn't working. Come on, technology, be nice to me. It's 2020. By now, we can't write on a PowerPoint without aggravation. And ferns, like most plants, the thing I'd like for us to keep in mind about ferns, they have a dominant sporophyte. So, hooray! It is now time for learning about the superstars of the plant kingdom, flowers, angiosperms, and seeing how flowers reproduce, and also answering the question that I'm sure is foremost in your mind is like, what are the sporophytes and the gametophytes in flowers? And you'll be surprised to learn that in the flowering plants, the gametophytes are so small, they're only just a few cells. And in the case of the female gametophyte, it's enclosed completely within the sporophyte. And coming up next, we're going to learn about the angiosperms. Thanks for listening, watching.